What's up, dudes and dudettes? Today I'm listening to a talk by Professor John Mearsheimer regarding what he believes are the roots of the conflict in Ukraine. And I thought I would give a couple comments because, to put it bluntly, he has not been to Ukraine and he has not understood or asked many Ukrainians. So again, I don't claim to be an expert on this situation, but I have spent the last 6 months in Ukraine or supporting the Ukrainian defense. I have met hundreds and hundreds of Ukrainians and spent a lot of my time with them. And we've had many of these such conversations. So perhaps you guys would be interested in hearing what I've gained and what I understand to be more of the Ukrainian perspective on this whole situation. All right, so let's summarize first Professor John Mearsheimer's assessment. And again, this is something he's been fairly consistent about. He did publish basically a paper about this, his opinion on this, after the 2014 invasion and basically occupation of Crimea. So this is not really a new thing from his perspective. Now, he's got a couple good observations. Some of his observations are very sharp. But in general, again, to say my summary, John Mearsheimer hasn't actually asked the Ukrainians how they feel about this issue, right? So, which I think is overly simplistic. So basically, he says the invasion of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine right now, is an American catastrophe that we've caused, that we fucked up big time. And that we're primarily to blame because Russia doesn't want NATO expansion onto its bordering territories. Russia wants to have a neutral Ukraine. Again, I'm quoting John Mearsheimer, okay? So this is not an opinion of my own. That Russia wants to have a neutral Ukraine and does not want to have basically NATO threatening its safety on its doorstep. Is there some value to his opinion here? And the answer is yes, there is definitely some value to this. If you were, let's say the United States, okay? And the Soviet Union was going to put missiles in Cuba. How would the United States feel about this issue? Well, the United States would take great offense to this and would probably have a military response. So is it understandable? Is it what's the right word? Can we sympathize with Russia being a self-respecting country that if a foreign power such as the United States or such as NATO wants to place essentially military influence right there on its border? Yeah, we can definitely sympathize that Russia would feel pretty offended by that. Having said that, is that American fault for wanting to bring Ukraine into its sphere of influence? Right? If we look at the history of the modern world, it's marked by colonialism, spheres of influence, which leads to, you can use all the buzzwords of genocide and enslavement and all those other topics that we can get into. Of course, we can say the N word and start getting into the whole idea of Nazis and stuff. But the thing is, like, a lot of people have done a lot of good things, and a lot of people have done a lot of bad things, right? I'm in airport in Munich, and I'm ordering food in English. And I'm wondering to myself, we're in Germany right now, but I'm speaking English just fine, and it's extremely easy for me to get around. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? In my humble opinion, it's neither good nor bad. It's just, it is what it is. We could have all been speaking German. If it would have been a slightly different turn of events, 60, 70, 80 years ago, we in the United States might be speaking German. But no, we're not. We speak English, right? Is that good? Is that bad? It doesn't really matter to me because here's the key point that I believe that Dr. Mearsheimer is missing, which is that it's not the Americans' job and it's not the Ukrainians' job to be concerned about Russian interests, to be concerned about Russian political interests. Yeah, so he basically lays out, okay, so pulling Ukraine into NATO is a big red flag, is a big red line that basically Russian policymakers don't want to cross. They don't want to allow that to happen. This is basically equal to a declaration of war. Okay, so Russia, as John Mearsheimer says, basically laid out a red line and they said, if you cross this line, if you try to pull Ukraine into NATO, we're going to have a war because Russia feels this to be an existential threat to their safety and existence. Okay, we understand that, got it. But back to the point here, which is it's not the American job and it's not the Ukrainian job to be concerned about Russians getting their feelings hurt. Okay, so in the end, it's going to come down to a question of, are we willing to have a war? That's the question. And so I believe what Dr. Mearsheimer is missing here, and by the way, I'm gonna leave a link to his lecture in the comments here in this video, so you're welcome to browse that as you wish. It's a bit of a long talk. It's about an hour long, plus comments and questions and discussions. So it's like a 2-hour video total, but I think the video is good. I think it gives you good perspective. Take it with a grain of salt, and perhaps address these comments and hear my comments as you listen to his talk. He basically lays out that this whole fuck up is caused because America really wanted to push for Ukraine to be part of NATO. Well, did you ask the Ukrainians if they wanted to be part of NATO? Maybe you could have rephrased this with saying, this war in Ukraine is caused by Ukraine wanting to be part of NATO, or Ukrainians wanting to affiliate with the West. Because if you attribute blame to, this is American politicians, American presidents, Bush, Biden, etc., who pushed the Ukrainians to be part of NATO, pushed NATO to take Jordan and Ukraine, therefore causing a Russian invasion of Jordan, and that's what he mentioned. I don't know all the details there. And of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Well, that's a little bit kind of missing a big deal here, right? I mean, that's missing a big deal because you didn't ask if Ukrainians wanted to be part of NATO, if Ukrainians wanted to associate the West, if Ukrainians wanted to be a satellite state of Russia, and you didn't ask if Ukrainians are willing to go to war so that they could leave the Russian sphere of influence, so they could join the Western, European, and American sphere of influence. I don't think you actually asked that question, or John Mearsheimer did not ask this question. And that's a huge mistake on his part. It's a huge problem. And so what this is going to end up being, in my humble opinion, is that, fast forward 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, whatever it's going to take, 10 years from now, Dr. Mearsheimer is going to be eating his words, saying, well, gee, maybe Americans caused the war, in a sense, by encouraging Ukraine, by allowing Ukraine, by bringing Ukraine in, by pledging assistance, by pledging weapons, by bringing in, NATO forces, trainers, and doing military exercises in Ukraine from the 2014 to 2021 time period. Maybe Americans have some part of this conflict as far as the root causes, but ultimately the root of the conflict is because Russia has imperialistic aims to have Ukraine as a sphere of influence, and the United States has different goals. Ukraine has different goals, and it's okay to have different goals. May the best man win, right? So in other words, it's okay to have differing goals. And eventually, a big superpower like Russia hits their red line, or hits their last, what's the word I want to use? Hits their last acceptable option until they decide to go to war. And if they do go to war, well then, that's what that is, right? So basically Dr. Mearsheimer is making this big deal about, this war is destroying the cities, destroying the country. Have you considered, Dr. Mearsheimer, that if we didn't have this war, that Ukraine would be under Russian control, like Belarus, like Chechnya, like Georgia, right? So these are areas where I meant to say Georgia earlier. I think I said Jordan. I meant to say Georgia. These are areas which Ukrainians see them as being very miserable areas as far as like people who live in slavery. And so the Ukrainian perspective on this matter is, if people are going to die, fine. If we're going to have a war, fine. But eventually, all will be Ukraine and people will be free. That's the way they see it. And this is why, humbly, I submit I'm in support of Ukraine, and why I have spent so much time and energy and risked my life to go there to support their war effort, their defense, and pulled as many resources as we could from the operations here, such as what I'm doing right now, the knowledge, the resources, the ammunition. This is why American government and a lot of American people are very much in support of Ukraine, because they see this very important mentality, which is to say, it's worth fighting for freedom. So anyways, I'm going to ramble. So I don't want to take up your time with just that rambling, but if you want to hear more stories about Ukraine, happy to share them. Just suffice to say that, regarding Dr. Mearsheimer's presentation, He may be very intelligent. He may have a good academic view of international relations. He may have studied Ukraine for a long time and understand some of the dynamics at play. What he doesn't understand is the common person's perspective. And the common person's perspective is it's better to be dead than to be a slave. I think many of us can agree with that. And if you can't agree with that, well, then you're a big wimp with no spine. So maybe you should grow a spine before you speak to me. Anyways, you guys be good. Have a good evening. I'll take any comments and questions down here. Just leave them in the comments, or you can email them to me, info@monarchdefense.org. Of course, we have classes every single week, 3-4 days of classes every week in the Bay Area. Tactics, shotgun, pistol, rifle, carbine, precision rifle. Obviously, we do classes also on how to make ammunition. If you'd like to learn these things, touch base with me at monarchdefense.org, and I'll see you later. A couple other thoughts, since I've got a minute to think about them. Dr. John Mearsheimer was saying that this war is catastrophic, it's devastating, and it's destroying the economy, it's destroying the cities, killing the people. That might be true, but I believe that that is a social media driven narrative, or a 1,000-mile perspective. When you're on the ground there, when you're seeing the actual economy, you're seeing the people, you're seeing their faces, you're hearing them discuss the war. That's not actually the whole picture. Yeah, there's a war going on. Yeah, there's people dying. Yeah, there's cities getting bombed and shelled. But you know what? It is the event. This war is the birth of a free people, a rebirth of a free people. It is pulling together the country. It's unifying the population. It's pulling together all kinds of amazing people wanting to help, who are working together, setting aside their differences, volunteering, donating, joining the military. It's pulling together all the relationships with NATO countries, Baltic states, all Eastern European countries, all like former Soviet satellite states who are worried about if they're going to be next to get an invasion. These are people who are coming together, and there's millions and millions and millions of people coming together. And frankly, it's really inspiring. And so, you know what? I don't see it as a catastrophe. I don't see it as a fuck up. I don't see it as a disaster. I see it as an opportunity for redefinition of a free people, of a free country, redefinition of what does it mean to have a successful economy. The economy is booming. It is growing fast, right? Now, of course, when I say booming, booming is relative to being in a war, okay? So relative to being in a war, the economy is booming. But like there's food, there's things on the shelves, there's transportation, there's fuel. What else do you want? What else do you like to see? In fact, the food there is fresher and better than the food I get here in California. The people are friendlier. They're more unified. They're working together. They're more patriotic. So is this really a catastrophe? Is this really a disaster? Yes, of course, people are dying. Yes, I get that. But is that the cost of freedom, first of all? Yes. And is that acceptable? And the answer is yes. If that's what it costs, if that's what it takes. And again, I'm not saying this is from my opinion. I'm simply trying to share with you guys what is the impression I get after working with so many different Ukrainians for the past 6 months, which is I get that their impression here is that like this is a necessary step, and the only way through this is to go through this. The only way to the freedom and prosperity that lies on the other side is to go through this time of hardship. But think about this, like nobody, like for example, if we look at me and my business, I didn't get here because I avoided conflicts, because I appeased other people, that I made other people happy because they laid down an ultimatum. If you do this, I'm going to get mad. That's not how I got to where I am. It's because I went into the conflicts, dealt with the conflicts, struggled through them, fought through them, and then got stronger and got better as a result of those things. And after the end of those conflicts, after winning those conflicts, then I'm able to be successful and be able to do what I do and have the life that I live, right? So using my experience, for example, as an example to this, I don't think that his characterization of this whole war as a disaster to begin with, he says specifically a disaster for the Ukrainians. And I don't think that that's a correct assessment. Now, to be fair, he wrote this during June. Or he gave this presentation during June. So Now it's already September going into October. Tomorrow begins October of 2022. So take that with a grain of salt. We have seen this war and the economy developed a lot more since then. But again, in the beginning of an invasion, what are you going to expect? Of course, people are going to be fleeing and leaving, but that isn't indicative of how Ukraine is going to do. See what I'm saying? So if we go back to June, you see these things happening. Yeah, it looks serious, but it isn't necessarily the whole picture. We have to wait to see the whole picture. So